It is not enough to contain ISIS. We must defeat ISIS, break its momentum, and then it's back. And not just ISIS, but the broader radical jihadist movement that also includes al-Qaeda and offshoots like al-Shabaab in Somalia.
Hillary Clinton is not half-baked in terms of her approach to these problems. She was obviously my Secretary of State. But I also think that there's a difference between running for president and being president.
Their approach to a large number of foreign policy issues is at least similar. She certainly has a well-earned reputation as an independent thinker, and so I'm confident there are probably some areas where she would disagree with the president.
Hillary Clinton this afternoon, a big foreign policy speech talking about ISIS, the threat of terror. And there you see the president back in October and his White House press secretary today. New polls out just last night, the Wall Street Journal, NBC. Among them, do you generally approve or disapprove the job the president's doing on foreign policy? There you see, upside down, 57%. The issues that are the top priority for the federal government, national security and terrorism, again, as we've seen in every poll, up at the top. And do you think that the next president should take an approach similar to that of Barack Obama, or should the next president take a different approach? Look at this. Different approach, 73%. So what does that mean for Hillary Clinton, the former Secretary of State? Let's bring in our panel. Syndicated columnist George Will, A.B. Stoddard, Associate Editor of The Hill, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. That last poll, George, is telling.
And whatever we heard today, it wasn't really a different approach. Now, she's a presidential candidate, so she can't obey the rule, do not speak unless you can improve the silence. So she has to keep talking, but she didn't have a lot to say today. I'm not sure what you say beyond at the one extreme, as she said, no large land war in the Middle East, fine, and then more of the same. So until they begin to unscramble the eggs in the Middle East, I don't know what she has to contribute at this point, or anyone else for that matter.
A.B.?
Well, if you listen to what the president was saying and Josh Earnest was saying, Hillary's obviously in a corner. She can't totally distance herself because she was Obama's Secretary of State, but she knows that his address a week ago did not calm the country, did not convince the country that he had a working plan. There was no change in strategy, and he didn't really acknowledge their fear. So the Democrats, who were just as disappointed as Republicans, not as angry about it, but, you know, in silence, obviously want to hear from Hillary Clinton that she understands that the country's afraid. So given the box she's in, I thought her speech was smart. She really spoke very clearly about fear that everyone's experiencing, and then how close it's hitting to home. It is at home. And then she actually talked about how we need Muslim Americans. Not that we respect them and they're our fellow Americans. We need their help. They're our first, best, and last defense against radicalization. So while she's in a primary, she's not going to talk much about what she's going to do in terms of training local forces and then inserting our own. I imagine she will in the general election, but I thought what she did today was smart for the moment she's in. Right,
but the GOP battle back and forth has provided her cover for not answering the questions about Obama foreign policy.
That's exactly right. It doesn't matter what she says. As long as she gives the appearance of being interested and slightly animated, unlike Obama, who again reads these statements, the one he did the other day, as if he's reading from the phone book. As long as she appears engaged, she's knowledgeable. Did you see how she dropped in al-Shabaab in Somalia as a way to say, look, I know what I'm talking about? That's all that matters. Nobody is listening to what she is saying on anything, least of all on this issue. She is going to have in the general election the Hubert Humphrey problem of 1968, when he had to decide if he was going to lash himself to Lyndon Johnson, the pro-Vietnam War position, or somehow deviate. And he walked that line exquisitely, and in the end, he lost because it was impossible to do. But for her, all she has to do is wait 6 months. It's going to look somewhat different in 6 months, and see who the opponent is. But for now, she's completely covered by the fact that no one is listening.
One thing has changed with Obama foreign policy definitively. Since the red line, where the president said if Syria uses chemical weapons, there will be action, there wasn't. Then the president said numerous times, Assad's days are numbered. He will go. Assad will leave Syria. And again, his days are numbered. Here's what the Secretary of State said today about Bashar al-Assad.
The United States and our partners are not seeking so-called regime change, as it is known, in Syria. What we have said is that we don't believe that Assad himself has the ability to be able to lead the future Syria.
A little difference in tone and tenor in that.
It is. It's not clear, I think, and you hear this among Republican candidates, that they're not sure it's really in our interest for Assad to go at this point. It's not clear that Israel wants Assad to go. So given that there's no substitute for Assad, no party that you can be sure would take over an Assad-less Syria, that's a regime change that he's talking about. He says not regime change is traditionally understood, but if you're decapitating an authoritarian regime, that's regime change, as we learned to our sorrow in Libya.
A lot different from his days are numbered.
President Obama said weeks ago that the Russians don't get it, that Vladimir Putin doesn't get it, that Assad has to go. And unless he comes around to that thinking, it's really hard to imagine working together because we ultimately don't have the same goals. I mean, I can't believe what just came out of John Kerry's mouth. It's completely contrary to what the president's been saying in this controversial, proxy war with Russia.
It's another reason why our allies are scared to death of the last year of this presidency. In every negotiation, you know that Obama is going to cede more and more ground. This was the central position of his Syria policy. Assad has to go. And now he's obviously signaling, Kerry's in Moscow, they're trying to buy off the Russians and the Iranians by actually withdrawing that. In the same way that when he did the red line for these chemical weapons, he backed away. And in the Iran negotiations, every red line established by the administration, no removal of sanctions at the beginning, no involvement of conventional weapons. They have to own up on the past military activities or nothing happens. Today, the IAEA reported that it gave Iran a clean bill of health after self-inspection. They gave in on everything on the Iran negotiations. With Obama, you're pushing against an open door. All you have to do is what Putin did, show resolve and don't move.
Quickly, domestically here, we had this threat that was emailed to Los Angeles schools. 640,000 kids then get pulled out of school. They essentially don't go. Some of them get taken back home. New York receives a similar threat via email, and they don't do that. What about the two coasts, how they've dealt with this threat, and what it signals for the way forward?
Well, to give Los Angeles the benefit of the doubt, New York has infinitely more experience with this. It knows it probably gets 10 times as many threats, and it essentially said, forget about it. L.A. is still at the beginning of the process.
Just after San Bernardino.
Exactly. And look, it was only the superintendent. Nobody else approved of that decision, although everybody said, well, I'll let him decide. It was one guy, and he made the decision, obviously the wrong one, but experience helps, and New York had it.
I don't think we can dump on L.A. This is a really, every threat is a threat, right? It might turn out to be one that wasn't going to be acted on ever, or they decided at the last minute. But how can they, in light of a very specific and they thought credible threat, not do it?
Is this the new normal?
It better not be, because this is an enormous disruption of an urban society that is capable of being a few clicks of a computer can bring this off.
The FBI deemed it non-credible. So, I mean, we're not ripping on Los Angeles, but it is indicative of what we're facing.
It is, but it's what we learned from this going forward is this is not the kind of decision that should be made by a superintendent of schools. It's a political decision, should have been made by the mayor in consultation with the FBI, that should have protocols in place for quickly examining emails like that.
Next up, what to